I need to tell you about the greatest thing that's ever happened to me.
Ooh.
I know that's a big setup, but just stick with me here.
Don't oversell this.
So, you remember when we talked about class action lawsuits recently? I think it was on a Q&A.
Yeah, we talked about, it might have been the Patreon episode, but yeah, we talked about like the surprise, oh, hey, here's $20 back. Yeah.
And which ones are legit and which ones are not. Anyway, I mentioned during that I had received $75 in the last year or two.
Congratulations.
As part of Maldonado versus Apple Incorporated et al.
Yeah.
Which I went back and looked. It just has to do with if you bought AppleCare Plus within a certain range and then got a device repaired or replaced on it.
Oh,
within a certain range. That's all it was. It was just, I think it's some class action about the language was you will receive a sort of a new product as a replacement. And the class says those products were not new. Anyway.
Yeah, I got a scratched iPod once.
Right.
When I sent my iPod in for repair.
Yes, something like that. Anyway, I got a $75 check sometime.
Congratulations.
A while back. Okay, the other day, this shows up also from replacement device lawsuit as the return address. I'm just going to read from this letter. You're receiving this check because you were a class member who cashed a check from the initial disbursement of the settlement fund.
Ooh.
Because not all class members redeemed their initial payments, there is money left in the settlement fund that is now being distributed to class members who did redeem a payment from the initial disbursement.
Ooh.
This check is for $130.
What? Well, I mean, it's weird because sometimes you get a check in the mail, you forgot you did a thing. And it's often those checks look real scammy, right?
Yes. But I mean, I cashed the first one. It went just fine. But
wow. Congratulations. $205 free bucks.
The idea that because I cashed the first check, they sent me another check for almost twice as much.
I mean, wow, way to follow through there, Brad.
I guess I feel bad for the people who didn't cash their initial checks, but only so bad.
When we talked about that, I forgot the most obvious one, which is that I'm eligible for the Bolt recall.
Oh.
So they did the Bolt batteries, and if you didn't do the batteries, if you had a car that was new enough that they weren't worried that the batteries were actually going to go, but still fell under the realm of the thing, then they made, it's a terrible deal. They were like, hey, we'll give you $1,500, but only if you run this software on your car that reduces the capacity by 20% of the battery for 3 months to test if we think it's going, which will give us the data we need to know if it's going to actually explode.
3 months.
3 months.
You can tough out for $500 a month.
Well, it depends on if we have to go someplace. If we want to drive to Tahoe or something, it's a real pain in the butt.
True. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, but anyway, $1,500 pretty good. Yeah, that would reduce the total spend on that car to under $2,000, I think.
Wow.
Yeah,
man.
Yeah,
we should have gotten an EV when the getting was good.
Yeah, the deals are gone now. People want EVs now, it turns out.
That's a shame.
Something about $5 a gallon gas. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, hey, there's a couple of life lessons for you. Cash your class action checks and buy an electric car.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
Ahoy, hoy.
Ahoy. Salutations.
Greetings.
I was trying to think of something nautical. What else is there besides ahoy that you would say on the high seas?
I think it's just ahoy, right? Land ho, but that's only if you see land.
Yeah, sure. It's some kind of naval greeting of some kind, naval address.
Greetings, comrade, I think is certain navies, but some probably not others.
Sure.
I don't know. Brad, I think this week, I think we should take a trip down memory lane.
Yeah, I like doing that. We've got show notes here. We've done some research.
I went deep into the garage when I was cleaning out some stuff before the holidays. And one of the things that came up was my 1996 vintage SpaceOrb 360.
Okay, that's where this came from. Because I thought this was like a highly specific suggestion for an episode topic when you made it. And wow, look at that. It's right there. Yeah. Hang on. Hold that pose.
Yeah.
I might use this as...
Well, let me turn the lights on.
All right. Okay. There. Okay. Now. Great. Okay. We've got
either that or the picture of Romero that we'll talk about in a minute.
We've got show art.
So I found this thing and I was like, man, look, The Xbox 360 era standardization of PC controls on 2 sticks, 4 face buttons, 4 triggers, 2 analog, 2 digital, and some start and select or box and hamburger and share or whatever you want to call them.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started. The schism that's happened on the start and select buttons in the last few years is one of my least favorite things about where video games have gone. Just call them start and select.
Yeah, I guess they're not the same. Like Xbox is share and anyway, start and select is the right answer. You're correct about that.
Like PlayStation's options and share now, option and share, something like that. And like Xbox doesn't even label them, but they do have names. Like one of them is guide, right? Or something like that.
I think Xbox, the one formerly known as the start button is the hamburger button is airbrush screen printed on both of my controllers that are sitting here. But the other one is where things get crazy. And on PlayStation, it's share. On an Xbox, it used to be share, and now it's something else. I don't know what it does on an Xbox.
Oh, the view button is now.
Oh, right. Yeah, the view.
The view button is select the menu. It's menu and view on an Xbox controller, which is blasphemy.
I think you mean start and select is what I'm hearing.
Definitely what I mean.
Anyway. So like undoubtedly good for games, right? It's made everything easier, but we've lost a lot of the mad science vibe that came with controllers in the 90s and early 2000s.
Sure. Looking at this list we've assembled, I can agree with you.
Yeah. So what if you are young to the point that you do not remember these days, there was a period of time before the mouse and the keyboard was the dedicated preferred way to play first person shooters. And I think part of that, like Wolfenstein, I don't think there was a mouse option. I don't think there was a mouse look option in Wolfenstein. I think it was just it was arrow keys and Control Alt Shift Space.
That sounds right.
To do the different things. I think Control was how you shot, and Alt was maybe how you opened doors. Space, was there a jump? No, jump was shoot. Space was shoot. Okay. And Control. Anyway, but there was an option button. There was other stuff that you had to do in Doom. Most people use the same config. Like very few people aimed with the mouse in Doom. And I think part of it is because when you pushed forward and back in Doom, it moved you forward and back in the game.
Yes, which always felt terrible.
Yeah, it felt bad. However, if you took the time to learn how to aim with the mouse in Doom and you played any kind of multiplayer games at all, you would just utterly decimate the people who couldn't like turn and strafe at the same time. Yeah. The circle strafe is what we call it now. Everybody knows about it.
Yes.
But at the time, it was a revolutionary new technique where you could go sideways and rotate the mouse so you were aiming at the center of the circle, basically, as you were going. And having spent a fair amount of time playing in college LANs, playing Doom in college LANs, people thought you were cheating. Like people who had always used the keyboard only to play, when you started doing that, they were like, what the fuck are you doing, man? You are cheating. How are you killing me? What devilry is this?
I was not smart enough to use a mouse to play Doom, but I did have a Gravis gamepad, and I mapped strafe to one of the face buttons. So I could turn, but then I could quickly hit a face button like as a toggle to strafe when necessary. And even that got me similar accusations when I played head to head over the modem with friends of like, hey, these rockets are just slow enough that if you just sidestep them, they won't hit you.
Yeah. So anyway, what happened after Doom came out, and it accelerated after Quake came out. So Doom came out in December of 93. Quake came out in the fall of 96. What happened after that was the crazy controllers accelerated, because everybody was like, well, the mouse and keyboard clearly isn't the way to play these games. We're going to make a whole bunch of other crazy things. Yeah.
Well, I'd jump in there and I would say that plus MLOOK happened in that range.
And MLOOK was not universal. It took a long time for MLOOK to be like, it wasn't until the kind of second wave of Quake Engine games landed that MLOOK became universal.
Absolutely. So I can't remember. I wish I had made a note of where I read this. I don't think it was in the Romero memoir that I read last year. It might have been like Carmack on Twitter or somewhere. I was reading about them talking about going through those iterations as Quake was coming, heading to the finish line.
Yeah.
Where they had all these different options for how they thought the mouse might work, because nobody had ever used a mouse to look in 3D space before. And they had at one time they had it where if you were looking with the mouse, but then started walking forward, the view would then default snap back down to level again.
Ooh, that seems bad.
But ultimately they decided to ship the game with MLOOK in there, but disabled. And you could only turn it on with a console command. So
which is crazy, right?
Right. Because then, I still remember, I vaguely remember at least the day that I enabled MLOOK for the first time. Changed my life, right? But But at the time, it was not seen as like the way to play a first-person shooter.
Yeah, it was definitely a third tier kind of choice. And I think the way it shipped was you had to press Alt. You had to hold a key down to look up and down to use for the mouse to move from the Doom style to where it controlled your movement axis, your forward and back, to looking up and down. I don't remember, but the upshot is MLOOK wasn't the default. It took a long time to get there, and Mad Cats, and like it was the 90s, so there were a lot of hardware companies still. They hadn't all consolidated. Logitech, Mad Cats, Thrustmaster, and then a bunch of other smaller places all were like, okay, we've done joysticks, we've done game pads, we've done wheels, we've done yokes. We can do this. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of weird first-person shooter specific hardware that came out.
It's like an arms race looking at all these ridiculous experiments.
It really was.
I'm also going to mention Descent real quick. Came out in March 95.
Yeah.
Which is unique because you were actually moving in a 3D space, not just looking, right? Like you weren't just a bipedal dude on the ground who was looking around. You were actually a ship in zero gravity, like flying in 6 degrees.
Yeah. Right.
So there were games on the market that were really starting to demand something that lets you move and look around in 3D space properly.
Yeah. So a lot of these early controllers, the first one that I saw was the Logitech Cyberman. This came out in 93. I think I bought one of these and returned it, or maybe I bought it and just chucked it in a box someplace and then never used it. But it was basically a mouse that had a stalk coming out of the bottom, and then the stalk was attached to a flat plane that slid inside a thing. So you could twist and tilt the mouse on top of it. Yes. You could also scooch it from side to side, slide it forward, the whole stem forward and back.
Oh, it slid as well. It didn't just rotate on this axis.
Yeah. And just so you know, we're going to put the link to the show notes. Like there's a Google Doc with pictures and links to stories about stuff and the whole thing in the show notes. So if you want to see what we're talking about and not just have us hear the descriptions, check that out.
Yes. Yeah. We'll just make that Google Doc public because there's too much to cram into the podcast post show notes.
Yeah. But yeah, so that thing slid forward and back. The tilting wasn't great. I remember playing Duke Nukem specifically with it because Duke Nukem, you could look up and down, even though it was a 2.5D first person shooter. But it wasn't, it didn't feel good. Like it actually felt pretty terrible. And when you hit the limits, it didn't always, like the games, you had to configure the software. The software had a bunch of stuff to configure. And when you hit the limits of the stem into the bottom, the slidey part, instead of the tilty and turny parts, you basically didn't work right in most games. And you had to change it for every single game pretty much.
Did this require specific support in a game?
No. So this showed up as a mouse and keyboard, I believe. You plugged it into, but I think you plugged it into a gamepad. Maybe it showed up as a gamepad and a mouse. I can't remember. But it was a very weird device. It was very janky. Yeah, it didn't review well. I looked for some reviews of it and couldn't really find a whole lot.
No, what I did find was, we'll talk about the Logitech Cyberman 2 in a little bit because we're going to go chronologically here. But I saw references to the original Cyberman in Cyberman 2 reviews, and they were not kind references. I have to say, this thing looked like a prototype to me. Like the mouse part looks like the most generic 90s ass. Like it looks like the crappy mouse that comes with your Packard Bell. In terms of just the form factor and ergonomics of the mouse, it looks like that just bolted to a base. Like this thing looks like a proof of concept.
Part of the problem, I think, is, if I remember right, was you had to, when you grabbed it, you had to kind of grab the stem part. So like in order to tilt the mouse forward, you had to kind of pull up on the back of it at the same time. Like it was weird. So it was hard to press the buttons and do the movement and all the things. And also when you think about it, it's weird to put movement and look on the same hand. Like what was your left hand doing when you're using this thing? I don't know. So anyway, it was a weird product. Like I said, I think it's something that I bought at Sam's Club or something and then returned because it was bad, actively terrible. And it didn't work. Like if I had to guess, I would say I bought this in the Duke Nukem Doom / maybe Descent era, because it was like coming into Descent, it felt like you needed a new controller, and I didn't have rudders for my joystick and throttle. So, clearly Descent wouldn't be playable.
I think we said it, but just in case we didn't, to be fair to this thing, it did come out in 93, so it's actually kind of way ahead of its time. And this edenwaith.com link in the show notes is actually somebody trying to resurrect one of these things in modern times.
Oh, wow.
Because it's so pre-USB, you know, it's a serial device.
Yeah.
And so they literally had to buy like a USB to serial adapter and try to like dump the protocol or whatever. Like they've got a bunch of like hex codes and stuff on here that they're going through trying to make this thing work.
I wonder if this, it looks like it came out pre-Doom. It was released pre-Doom, like the Rise of the Triad and MechWarrior 2. So like the thing about MechWarrior 2, if you've never played that, it wasn't a twitch aiming game. It was like a lock onto your target and kind of point in the general direction game. So it makes a lot of sense for this kind of controller. If you were playing an actual first person shooter, it would be a little bit more difficult. Also, this Eden Waith thing points out that it had rumble, which I'd completely forgotten. So you had to put batteries in it because serial obviously didn't provide power, but it would bounce. It had a little tumbly motor in it that would make buzzing noises when you whacked into stuff. If the game supported it, I guess.
Yeah. Fun.
So for weird controller aficionados, it was a dark time from then until 1996 when the Mad Catz Panther XL came out.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this is maybe one of the only ones of these things that was actually good.
Did you use one?
Yeah, I used one of these.
I'm impressed. I have to say I'm impressed at how many of these you seem to have touched at some time.
Well, so I went to LAN parties, like pretty good sized LAN parties on the East Coast at the time, because you couldn't really play a lot of multiplayer games. And I went to, I want to say DC Con in 96.
Wow.
When a lot of these people had stuff set up.
Was that full on? That was full on BYOC. Like you hauled your
I hauled my pizza box up there. Yeah,
man.
And a 25-pound CRT probably. So the Panther was a joystick, like a flight stick type joystick with a hat and triggers and multiple top buttons and the whole thing. And then on the left, and then there was a kind of kidney shaped base, and on the left side of the base was a pretty good sized trackball, almost like a Missile Command. Or, like an arcade trackball, a centipede trackball, not quite as big as a centipede or millipede trackball, but same ballpark, probably a 2-inch ball if I had to guess.
Sure. It's not the worst idea. Like joystick plus trackball, like that. Actually, those are both proven input methods. You know, you could kind of see them working in tandem.
Yeah, it felt pretty good. So this was one, I'm pretty sure they had it set up there. Maybe I played with one that somebody had brought. And, you were shooting and moving with your right hand and aiming with your left hand, which was different. By this point, I would have been using mouse and keyboard because I feel like if Quake hadn't been out, Q3 Test was out, and you were like, became clear that you were gonna have to be able to aim up and down before long. You couldn't just drift on aiming perfectly straight all the time.
You had to shoot down through those murder holes below you and the walkway below you.
You had to shoot rockets at people's feet, or you wouldn't be able to do a murder on them. So you use the mouse, the trackball worked like a mouse. Your movement was on the stick. The hands were reversed from what you normally do with the mouse and keyboard now, unless you're left-handed.
Yes, that's what I was waiting to say. Is I think it's kind of an odd choice to put the joystick on the right, like normally. I mean, granted, that's biasing for right-handed people. Like obviously, left-handed people probably had a good time with this thing, but generally, I would want my pointing device on my dominant hand, and the joystick is less important there.
I don't think we realized that was important at the time. And also I would say that because the joystick is handed, it's clearly a right-handed joystick because it has a thumb button.
Yeah.
I think that probably the cost of doing this the way that you would expect with the aiming on the right hand and the movement on the left hand probably would have multiplied the cost of this thing by a pretty substantial margin, because they would have to make left-handed molds.
Sure.
But yeah, it worked pretty well. The trackball was like using a trackball for first-person shooter controllers works actually surprisingly well. I don't know if you remember this, but Jason Bergman, known as Looney Boy at the time over on Blues News, who's gone on to work on a bunch of different games over the years, but famously posted on Blues News about his one-handed Doom and Quake playing technique, which was that he bound, I think, mouse 3 on a trackball and a Logitech thumb trackball to walk forward, and then would steer with the mouse and shoot with the left mouse button.
Oh, that's intense.
Yeah.
I think I've talked about this before. I had walk forward on mouse 2 for years and years.
Madness.
But even I still needed the keyboard. I still had most of the other stuff on keyboard keys. So to do everything with one hand is impressive.
Absolute madness. I think the Panther, so a lot of these devices are combo joystick port and serial devices, which I think is what the Panther was. The joystick port was a MIDI port that Creative Labs and Microsoft had done some software work on.
Oh, is that what okay. And was it called a game port? I think they
called it a game port. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't realize that was like a custom thing. I had always wondered where the game port came from and who standardized it and et cetera, because it was often on your sound card.
So yeah, it was a standard MIDI port. And you could use most MIDI ports for game ports if there were drivers for them. But Creative Labs and Microsoft had done some custom work on the driver to make it work with game controllers.
That explains why I plugged my Gravis gamepad into my Sound Blaster for so long.
Well, and it also, the nice thing about MIDI was it let you do analog and digital feeds for different inputs. So you could do I think 2 analog axes and a whole 16 buttons or something like that. Maybe 3 analog axes. I can't remember. So yeah, Panther XL, it was weird. They didn't make it for super long. It only produced until 1998, which means basically it was out. It was done before like Quake multiplayer stuff had really even taken off, which is a weird thing to think about.
Is it safe to, I don't know if we can dig this up on every product. Is it safe to assume most of these were not in production for very long? I don't think any of them like truly hit.
I think that, yeah, like probably there's a couple down here later that went for a little bit longer, but yeah, most of these were 1 to 3 years on the outside. So the next one is one of my favorites. Is what we talked about earlier in the show. It's the SpaceOrb 360. I won this at a LAN party.
Nice.
Which is maybe the only thing I've ever won at a LAN party. But and just to be clear, drawing, not competitive, I believe, if I recall right. But SpaceOrb is you've probably seen pictures of this. It's popular on the internet because it looks really weird. It's got a ball. It's got a ball on the left side where the analog stick on like a Dreamcast controller would be, and then on the right side there's 4 face buttons, and it's got 2 triggers on the top. Which I think this was maybe the first thing I ever saw that had triggers on it on a gamepad situation as well.
And then we should point out the orb is something you palm. It's not like on the face of the controller. It's more like the entire kind of upper left quadrant of the controller is scooped out and a giant rubber ball is there in its place. Like it's a pretty sizable orb.
Yeah, but the idea was that you put your thumb on the center of the ball on the face side so you could push it forward and back, and you kind of grip it so it's like twisty. I don't know if you can see that, but you kind of grip it on the back with 2 fingers. So you can, basically the ball was a 6DOF controller. So you could go forward, back, left, right, and up and down, and then also twist X, Y, Y, Z, whatever the other one, XZ. So you can twist on all 3 axes or any combination thereof. And there's like a little, I don't know if you can hear it, but there's like a little springy kind of mechanism in there.
It looks like a stress ball.
It does look like a stress ball. Yeah. And surprisingly, unlike every other piece of 20-year-old rubber I have in the house, it doesn't have like a weird tacky feel or anything like that to it.
Oh man.
Like they made it out of this thing was built to last. The company that made this also made what I would describe as weird CAD controllers as well that were like $1,500. I think this launched at $100, maybe $150, $100 according to Boot Magazine.
Who did make this thing? I'm actually not seeing that.
The company, they spun off a separate company to do it, but I think it might have been called SpaceOrb, SpaceTech, IMC.
SpaceTech, yes. SpaceTech, TEC, SpaceTech IMC, first bought by LabTech. God, remember LabTech?
Yeah, LabTech was big in the CAD space for a long time.
Wait, were they?
Yeah.
Jeez, I both have not thought about LabTech in like 20 years and also feel like we could maybe do an entire episode about LabTech.
Maybe, yeah.
They made a lot of stuff.
So the SpaceOrb, because of the 6DOF nature of the controls, it was great for games like Descent, right? Like you could push forward, you could go up, down. You were an unstoppable killing machine in Descent. The twist, the lateral translational movement, the strafing basically was quite good and very reliable. The twisting, as I recall, was a little jittery. And I feel like it's the kind of thing that like in a modern context, they would have added a little bit of software smoothing to, and you would have never noticed that it had a problem. Back then we didn't do such things. And so like it would skip because you were passing all this data over a serial port. I think 112 kilobaud or 112 kilobits per second or whatever it was that you got out of a serial port was maybe gating your perf.
Interesting.
But yeah, it was a pretty remarkable thing, and it worked. Like I said, I ended up not using it for very long, but I'd whip it out for descent. Was the reg until I got a Thrustmaster, like a FLCS, like a F-16 flight stick with the HOTAS and the whole thing. It was my descent thing of choice.
Yeah, and it seems to have been pretty popular. I found a post on Scott Hanselman's blog. I swear that name sounds familiar. I don't know why I know him. Scott
Hanselman is a noted hacker of things.
Okay. A programmer, teacher, speaker, technologist is how he seems to. Anyway, this blog post is from 2010, so it itself is fairly old, but at the top, it's about the SpaceOrb. He says, 15 years later, and I'm still convinced that the SpaceOrb 360 is the greatest game controller of all time. But this whole blog post is about this cottage industry or scene of people who have come up with an Arduino-based solution for getting the SpaceOrb 360 to continue to work on modern PCs.
Yeah, so it basically makes it show up as a USB HID device, and you have two different modes for it. One is mouse and keyboard, and one is joystick. Unfortunately, the Shield is no longer available anywhere that I could find. I was going to buy one so I could put it together and try it out.
That's a shame.
Scott's a vice president at Microsoft. Also, he's a developer community guy.
Oh, now. Okay. That's why I've heard.
That's why you know him. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, SpaceOrb, kind of cool. I'm gonna say.
Yeah, seems like a neat idea.
Yeah, it's unlike anything. It is completely unique amongst these controllers.
It's probably the most like I don't want to use the word innovative as a bit grandiose, but it's the most like thoughtful thing on here, I think, because everything else is like some maybe ill-advised combination of existing input methods, or like it's just a joystick with a little extra or something. But this thing is actually like it's unique on this list, and it seems like they actually put thought into how you would play a game with it.
Well, yeah, some of the other ones, I would say maybe the cost of manufacturing impacted the usability of them. This one's pretty good. Like I said, I distinctly remember the movement being a little bit, the aiming being a little bit jittery. But yeah, it was unlike, it didn't feel cheap, I guess, compared to some of these other boxes. Like the next one, the Logitech Wingman Warrior.
Yes.
This 97 is this is a 97 release.
Yes, this is kind of what I was thinking of when I said like, hey, it's just a joystick with some stuff. Like in this case, instead of a trackball, it's a dial. It's like a straight up centipede machine dial on the side of this joystick,
or Tempest dial. Yeah, it's not even a 2-axis dial. It's just a 1-axis dial.
Yep.
It seems like it was made for Doom specifically in 1997, which was a little bit late for Doom.
Yes, you linked the manual on archive.org for this thing, and I was looking through it, and then looked at the date it came out, and I was just like, you poor.
Yeah,
like how did you do this to yourselves? Like this thing is just for aiming on the x-axis back and forth at a time when that was almost 5 years outdated.
Well, this was a time before joystick twist was a thing, right? Like they were still trying to sell rudders for joystick for every flight stick that they sold, so nobody was putting a z-axis twist on a rudder twist on the joystick, which is essentially what this wheel is. I think it showed up as a mouse. I was looking for people who were trying to get it working, so this was another joystick plus serial port thing. This one flummoxed me. There's another spinner that was the y-axis for your thumb on the twisty side, on the left side of so this is just to paint a word picture. This is another joystick with a thing dangling off the left side of it. In this case, the left side is a big, like 1.5 inch red spinny top. It wasn't loose like a Tempest spinner though, as I recall. I never bought one of these. I used it I touched it in Best Buy. I was like, oh yeah, no, this is a no for me, dog. It has a mouse wheel type spinner below the thing, and then it has some thumb buttons. It's a right-handed joystick again, so you're doing your aiming with your left hand and you're moving with your right hand, which feels. I guess when you're doing a gamepad, you use your right hand to aim, right?
Usually. Now, yes.
Now in the modern context.
Yeah, on a dual analog, yes.
The most notable thing about this is I was looking through some old boot magazines to find people talking about the different products here. There was an ad from Logitech with John Romero holding one of these up above his head, and the quote at the top is great. John Romero, who is listed as id Software stud and co-creator of Doom, Doom 2, Harridan, Hexen, and Quake.
Oh, I hadn't. This in the Google Doc, it's a little too small to notice that text. I had missed id Software stud. But this is absolutely but this was after he was out of there.
Almost certainly, yeah.
Unless this ad long predates the launch of the product, because he was out of there mid '96.
Well, so the quote is,
yes, very, very much in the heyday of him being in ads and promoting his brand, though.
This is when he was going to make you his something or other. It says, "When I created Doom, I never imagined there'd be a killer way to play it. Wingman Warrior is it." It's shocking to me that this thing shipped ever.
Yeah.
They must have spent a lot of money making the molds for this in order to release this in a post-Quake world.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I want to point out, in contrast to the general swagger of the rest of this ad, Logitech's motto at the time, products people love.
That's true. That was their motto at the time. I mean,
there maybe has never been a more generic corporate slogan than that in history.
What was Sony's make believe?
Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, it was make believe.
Sure.
Yeah.
Products people love.
Okay. Also in 1997, confusing the market was the Logitech Cyberman 2.
Yes.
No, it was not for online fornication. That'll come later.
Yes. Yes. No, we'll get to the Falcon later. But
yeah, the Cyberman 2, the boot review written in July of 97, the July of 97 issue, which would have been written in probably April, was said it's better than the first. This is another kidney shaped thing that sits on your desk, but instead of having a joystick on one side and some sort of aiming controller on the other side, this one puts the aiming thing on the right and the movement thing on the left. So the movement part is a slidey top that is forward, back, X. It's like there's a circle that moves on the XY axis, and you can use that to basically pass WASD commands through as if it's a keyboard. There's some buttons on that side, so you can do gun selection, jumping, that kind of stuff for at finger position and thumb position. So you could palm it basically. So you put your palm on this thing, you move it forward and back, left and right. That part actually pretty good. It felt pretty good. The aiming part was do you remember those thumb pad, those eraser heads on old Lenovo and IBM laptops?
Oh yeah. Yeah. The classic, the nub.
Big one of those guys.
Okay.
So it was a knob that was 2.5 inches across and rubber and grippy. You'd kind of grab it and you could tilt it forward, back, left and right a little bit. And that would, and twist it as well. Which would let you do all of the things you do with a mouse, I guess.
This review from Boot Magazine by Brian Del Rizzo describes it as a puck.
Yeah, it's puckish.
Kind of a way to think of it. I have a little bit of a bone to pick with old BDR here. Not a lot of description in this review of how it feels to use.
No, my guess is this review feels a little soft. Sorry, Brian, we love you. But yeah, it was, he does describe it as fully digital. There's a patent diagram of how it works on the twisting and all that. Cause they made a big point of it being all digital and not analog. Because at that point, that was the time in history when if you plugged you initialize your joystick at the wrong time, it would be off axis and you'd have to reinitialize it. Mm-hmm. He talks a lot. I mean, this is a 175 or 200 word review probably, so it's a little short, maybe 300. I don't know. He doesn't talk about how you use it in Quake or Doom or something like that, which is what I really want to know. I didn't spend much time with this at all. I don't think I ever used it actually plugged in. I just, or if I did, it was only for a minute or two. It was already gone by the time its time had passed by the time I was covering this stuff as a real thing. This one actually looks like they had played video games before they designed it though.
Yeah. This one, like the SpaceOrb, has got some thought put into it. It's a unique design at least.
Yeah. And it's definitely not he does say it's not for flight games, even though you do have a kind of joystick thing on there. I don't know. This is a weird one. I'd be curious to fire one of these up. The thing that he does include in this review that I love is the configuration app.
Yeah.
The screenshot of the configuration app where they have like presets for different games, but you can literally bind all the axes and twist and all the different stuff to all the different possible uses for the device, which is weird. Okay. I think this next one is maybe the bottom of the barrel, which is really saying something. The Thrustmaster Fragmaster. Brad, do you want to take a stab at describing this one?
The best thing I can think of to say about it is that it looks kind of like some of the alien architecture from the Alien and Aliens films, or Alien in particular, like the H.R. Giger spaceship stuff from Alien. Like it looks like a control interface from that.
It's Giger-esque. It's so there's a round base that's fairly substantial, and then coming out of the center of the base, there's like a delta shaped thing. Basically, is how I would describe it.
Triangular. It's not a joystick because there are two hand grips. It's almost like an arch. It's like a triangular thing, but with a big cutout in the middle, so your fingers can grip both sides of it.
Yeah, I never used one of these. We had one at Maximum PC that was just basically glued to the wall in the top of the lab as part of our wall of shame. But yeah, this was made by Thrustmaster. It's called the Fragmaster. They sold it as a first-person shooter controller, and as it was designed for games like Quake. I don't know. I don't exactly understand how it was supposed to work. I think you were moving by pressing the buttons and steering like this thing, almost like it was like a yoke for your steering. Yeah. I would love to hear. We put this in here. Like I said, I don't think anybody really used this ever. There were a couple of videos where people dredged it out on YouTube and tried to make it work and kind of had mixed results. But the reviews that we were able to find described it as very uncomfortable and didn't feel the least bit natural.
I can see that.
Yeah, it looks like the kind of thing that somebody was like, hey, man, we got to get a FPS controller. You better make it look weird. And also it's going to have a thing called megahertz mode where it works just like a real mouse.
Hang on. You need to explain. We need to spell megahertz, MEGAHURTS.
Is it S or Z?
Yes. I'm looking at the box here.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at a photo of the box, megahertz mode. Like you're going to hurt them mega.
Disappointing.
Uh-huh. I don't know about the branding here. Thrustmaster, Fragmaster. Like, I don't think you can do that.
I think they called most of their things the something master.
Oh, were they all like that?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess that makes a little more sense.
Yeah. It was either something master if it was an arcade controller, or it was like they would knock off the A10 Warthog or the F16 FLCS system and like do an actual military joystick. They were Thrustmaster at that point was mainly real airplane joysticks was their kind of bread and butter. So like, and just to be clear, this was an expensive thing to make. Like this has got a boatload of plastic parts. So they spent at least, hundreds of thousands of dollars making these molds. And so this must have been perceived as an incredibly lucrative opportunity for the entire market to figure out, because they were all trying to do these weird proprietary things that really didn't work at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this came out in 98. I mean, this was right in the middle of the Quake explosion, right? And like Unreal came out in 98. Like the first person shooter scene on PC was just exploding at this time. So
97, 98, Quake was an enormous thing. People were playing a lot of Duke Nukem. And we were all looking like the heady coverage online and in print of the first wave of Quake Engine games and then Unreal Engine games after that was enormous, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Like Sin and Half-Life came out in 98 as well. So
Sin, Half-Life, Heretic 2, Quake 2 was supposed to ship in 98. I don't think it shipped until 99.
I always just thinking in retrospect, I always pair Sin and Half-Life in my mind because they're two Quake Engine games that came out very close together. They were like the first two big ones, I guess I would say. It might be a little generous to mention Sin in the same company as Half-Life in this day and age. I don't know.
But at the time, Sin came out, a week before or something, 2 weeks before Half-Life? And then Heretic 2 came out the week after. Those were all 3 Quake Engine games. Heretic 2 was made by Raven.
Quake 1.
Engine
or
games.
2. So some of that stuff's a little messy, I think.
Yeah.
I think Half-Life is all Quake 1 code. I don't think they put in
I
Quake
think
2.
it's hard to say.
Yeah, like
because I think they took code dumps from it all the way through and cherry picked the stuff that they wanted. Would be my guess.
That's touched on in the Romero book. That was part of the reason Daikatana took so long to come out. Is they did a ton of work on Quake 1 code, and then he saw Quake 2 at E3 and was like, "Well, we got to be on that engine." So they went and relicensed and had to throw a bunch of work away. Anyway, Sin came. Oh, you're right. Actually, Sin came out November 5th of 98.
Yeah.
Half-Life came out
like November 17th or 11th or something.
November 19th. Wow, they were like, God, you're right. They were like 2 weeks apart.
And then literally Heretic 2, which was a third-person game, but also based on the Quake engine, came out from Raven, who had made the good Quake mission packs.
Yes,
came out the week after Half-Life 2, Half-Life 1.
I did not realize that. You're right. I never played Heretic 2. That's cool.
No one did because Half-Life came out the week before.
Yeah. Oh, you're not wrong.
So yeah, it was a like people. The perception in the hardware manufacturers had to be that there was a lot of money for whoever cracked this first, right? Yeah. And that's why they kept like we've talked about 3 Logitech things already.
Yes,
right.
Yes, of course. The amusing punchline here is that I guess nobody ended up cracking it.
Well, yeah. Well, hold on. We'll get there.
We'll get there.
In 1998, the Sidewinder Freestyle Pro, not really a first-person shooter controller, but we're going to talk about it because it had motion control. Was a gamepad with a D-pad and some face buttons, but it also had an accelerometer so you could tilt on 2 axes to control your games.
Yes. Was this just the form factor of the regular Sidewinder?
Oh no, no, it was much worse.
Okay. Sure.
They made it look like a big long boomerang. So it has like dangly prongs that you hold that rendered the D-pad almost completely unusable in any configuration. So I bought one of these because I needed a gamepad. And I went to the store and I was like, oh, this one's $3 more. I'll get this one because it has this motion shit that I'm probably never going to use. But it also comes with Motocross Madness, which that looks cool. Oh, my God. It was maybe the worst gamepad I've ever used. It's right up there with the N64 gamepad. It is the D-pad. I don't know that there was a way to physically hold this device that made the D-pad comfortable. In order to use the accelerometer, I couldn't find confirmation of this online, but judging by the price and the time period, I'm reasonably sure it's just an accelerometer inside, not an accelerometer and gyro. You had to switch the device over from analog to digital modes. You couldn't use I think the D-pad showed up as a hat switch on the joystick if you were in accelerometer mode, but it was weird. Motocross Madness, reasonably fun with it, I'll say, because you tilted the thing up to make them to do wheelies.
Yes.
Other than that, it was unusable and was a terrible device. Should be put in the Hall of Shame with the U-Force and the Fragmaster.
Oh, you mean the game that shipped with it was the only game to make good use of its weird bespoke feature?
Look, there were several other Microsoft Game Studios titles that also supported it to lesser, greater amounts. Look, it's the thing I'll say about this is it's a testament to how much the Fragmaster looks awful that I used this thing and know how bad it is. And I still think probably the Fragmaster is the worst thing on this list. Fair.
Seeing this, the full name, let me just, Sidewinder Freestyle Pro is the full name of that product. But I looked up, this has reminded me I did own a regular Sidewinder somehow.
The one with the 4 face buttons?
Yeah, I think it has 6. There were multiples, weren't there?
There were multiples, yeah.
I had the one with 6 that also has prongs that you grip, but it had 6 face buttons.
Okay.
But
is it the blue one?
It was black or grayish, dark gray.
Okay.
Crucially, it has the same god-awful D-pad as the Freestyle Pro that we're talking about with the tilt. Oof. It is the ugliest D-pad in history. It looks like it's melted plastic. It literally looks like they took a regular D-pad, melted it halfway, and then put like a heavy ball bearing in the middle of it or something.
Yep. Well, Nintendo had the plus. They patented a plus, so you couldn't do a plus at the time.
Yeah, and so Sony had done the weird fake four-way buttons design.
So there's also the they did multiple generations of the Sidewinder gamepad, which also they also had this Sidewinder gamepad Pro, which kind of split the difference between the Freestyle I'll put a picture of the Freestyle in the show notes. But the Sidewinder Pro was more of a boomerang design that looked almost like those prototypes of the PS3 gamepad that came out for a little while.
Yeah, actually, you're right. The Batarang.
Yeah, the Batarang.
The Batarang PS3 controller. Yeah, I can see that.
The Freestyle Pro is an all-time bad tier for gamepad design, though.
It's fugly.
Yeah. Next, 1998 brought the Sidewinder Dual Strike. Microsoft clearly invested heavily in this space. They thought there was something here. The Dual Strike is, imagine if you had a gamepad with a ball and socket joint connecting the left and the right halves. Mm-hmm. And that ball and socket joint is an XY joystick. So you can mouse with the gamepad.
Like by twisting it. It's almost like a, is it the JogCon or the NegCon? What was the
NeoCon or the NegCon? Yeah, that thing. But it's 2-axis. It's not just 1 axis.
Was it the NegCon? Which I cannot remember which Namco controller it is that twists in the middle, but it's not entirely dissimilar to that. Although this moves on, like you said, on more axes. It was the NegCon.
The NegCon, yeah,
was the Namco twisty controller. But this is more elaborate than that. Also, this is like when you look at it, it actually kind of looks like two Wiimotes, like two Wii controllers, but just with this big connective thing in the middle that actually is binding them together and on this joint.
Yeah, I feel like I used this one and really immediately dismissed it. People really like it. Like people use this today. Still, people have done a lot of effort to get this. This is by the time the Freestyle Pro came out, we were into USB and weren't using serial and joysticks anymore. So people can write custom drivers for these things in the world of today. I think the Freestyle Pro and this both had joystick port connector that then you could that came with a USB adapter as well, though. So you can still use them. It like I said, I don't remember using this or I immediately dismissed it and wasn't reviewing this stuff yet. But it was, like I said, the reviews are really positive for this. People seem to really like it and express why they like it in ways that make me think it's probably actually weirdly okay. Unlike it would work with all the current games is the thing. Like it's like the controls are still valid today for all intents and purposes.
Sure. And I'm trying to find if this was USB. This was probably USB.
This was both. This had an adapter. Okay. Yeah, so this was USB and there was a game port. It was game port by default and had an adapter that you could plug in for USB, I believe. It might actually just, I'm looking at this Neo or ActiveWin review and it might just be maybe it's USB only. This might be the first USB only one.
This was 99. This was about when like mice were starting to go USB only, stuff like that.
Yeah, you'd have more than 2 USB ports on your computer by this point. It is unclear to me.
Anyway.
Yeah, this might be USB only.
Okay. I wouldn't be surprised if there are people still out there trying to make this thing work right now.
There are, I will tell you. Oh yeah. Everyone take note, the Dual Strike controller is USB only, according to the ActiveWin.com review. Okay. It is 100%. There are 100% people still using this. I saw a thread of people trying to use this with Rage like 5-6 years ago.
Interesting.
Or Rage 2, maybe.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I think I have found a thread on vogons.org. Are you familiar with that site?
I remember vogons.org. Yeah.
I believe that's a good place to get a lot of old drivers for computer stuff.
Yeah.
Old computer stuff. But I found somebody on here who apparently has developed their own open source driver and interface for the Dual Strike.
Yeah. Imagine if you took the time to build muscle memory using a device like this and then like they stopped making more. Like imagine if you learned how to use a mouse in 1998 and then they suddenly stopped making mice. And it was just all trackpads from here on out. And you're like, man, I hate trackpads.
Yeah.
We got the Sidewinder Dual Strike next in 1999. Oh, that's this one. Sorry. We have the Sidewinder Game Voice came out in 2000. That launched at the same time as the Strategic Commander, which we've talked about in the past. But it's basically the Strategic Commander is basically the Cyberman 2 slidey movement thing plus a whole buttload of buttons. The Game Voice was an interesting, weird thing. It used MSN Messenger and some proprietary software to give you a like essentially early TeamSpeak or type experience, but you could bind. It had a bunch of keys on it. One of them switched between the speaker input and the mouse and the headset. So you basically could bypass your speakers only if you had a stereo speaker configuration. If you had multi-channel, you were out of luck there. which was beginning to become popular in 2000. But you had push to talk buttons for multiple groups of people. You could do like an all talk. You could do just your team. You could do just your squad if you were playing a game that had a bunch of people in it.
And that's what this little dongle is for, I assume.
Yeah, the dongle is just, I think, a hardware switch for the keyboard, for the speakers and the headphones, and then like that showed up as keyboard or joystick buttons for push to talk that were not accessible to anything except for the Game Voice software, as I recall.
I see.
I did not. I can't remember if I reviewed this or someone else did. I don't think we gave this a very good review in Maximum PC.
I'm guessing, yeah, just thinking about what voice stuff was like at that time, it probably didn't work all that well.
Well, so the voice stuff worked pretty well. It also had voice recognition. The problem was nobody did voice because almost everybody was on modems still.
Sure.
Like broadband hadn't reached any kind of penetration. Getting your friends to install some weird software so they could hear you was unlikely. Nobody, like, headsets were unusual at this point still. So it wasn't until Microsoft shipped the first, what was it, the second Xbox?
Yeah,
360. The 360 came with a headset that headsets became a thing that you had to have.
Yes, 360. Every single one had headsets in there. I think did the Xbox Live kit for original Xbox also did those all come with headsets? I don't know if that was separate or not.
Yeah, if you bought, you had to have, the Live kit had a CD, right? You had a CD, had a game disc and a headset and a dongle. I never controller.
Yeah, I never got on Xbox Live on the first Xbox for some reason, which is insane to me in retrospect because everybody around me was doing it. But
yeah, there wasn't. I think I mostly games, actually. Yeah, because was Halo 2 on Xbox Live at that point? It was. That was pretty much the only thing that and like Mech Assault and a couple of other things were what you could play.
It was a few things. I was not that big into Halo. It was, I guess, part of the reason I never got on there.
Well, so it's worth mentioning that around this time, around 2000, is when the original Xbox launched and Halo came out. And I guess we'd seen Time Splitters prior to that had a dual stick configuration that worked with like a little bit of aim assist and stuff like that. But that's kind of the end of this era for all intents and purposes.
Actually, if you look at this timeline we have constructed here, the last device with a couple of exceptions is 2001, which is the same year that Halo came out.
Yeah. So the 2001 was just a mouse with rumble.
Yeah,
it's the Logitech iFeel mouse. They worked with Immersion Corp, who had a patent on adding rumble to touch to mouse and mouse devices from 1997. I reviewed these for Maximum PC. It's one of my all-time favorite mice. The sensor was bad for games. It was really low res by today's standards.
I thought you were about to say it was like one of your least favorite. That's surprising.
Well, so they were very light mice, very small mice, but the haptic stuff in Windows, surprisingly, was really, really useful. So you could feel the edges. It gave you know how you have the haptic support on a modern Mac touchpad where you feel the edges and you hit bumps when you hit stuff and things like that. Yeah. You don't even notice it anymore.
Yeah.
But it's there.
Oh, man.
And having that haptic bump on input devices is incredibly useful.
Wow. Actually, I'm just thinking now about like ways you could use that as you're navigating graphical UI, like crossing window borders or whatever.
Yeah, it was very subtle. It wasn't like the kind of thing that you notice after 10 minutes, but it makes using Windows a little bit easier, especially as we were moving to higher resolution displays back then. So,
man, that's a cool idea. I kind of wish they would maybe try to bring that back.
Well, the patent expired 7 years ago, so maybe somebody will do. I mean, I assume that patent expired around the time the haptic stuff started coming out on the MacBooks. So maybe those two things are related. And those mice weren't like crazy expensive mice either. I think Logitech did 2 generations of them. They didn't sell well enough that they kept doing them, and not a lot of games supported the API stuff. So it was a little underwhelming on the game side.
Oh yeah. The basic one was $39.95. That's pretty cheap.
Yeah. 2007, the Novant Falcon came out. So this spun off of military SimTech. It was basically a robot that sat on your desk. It weighed a ton. It had 3 arms that were connected to actuators, and you you snapped a controller into the end of the arms, so you could there was a gun handle, like a pistol handle controller. There was just a orb with some buttons on it. There were a couple other things, and then there was a thriving aftermarket of community created things that you could attach onto this. But the neat thing about it was the arms were connected to actuators, and they would push back, so they could control the positioning of the controller in space to a pretty wide range, and it could measure both the translational movement in and out, as well as side to side, up and down. Valve supported it with a bunch of their like TF2 and Half-Life 2, and I think Day 1 maybe, or Day 0 supported it. A bunch of different things supported it. And then eventually they released a driver that let it work with every mouse and keyboard game pretty much. It was a weird thing. It was basically, they took something that cost $15,000 or $20,000 in the sim and like military market and sold it for, I think, a few hundred maybe was this Ars story from 2008 says priced 175 to 240, which I guess is just retailer variation. No, it's based on which attachments you got. So whether you got the wand attachment or the gun attachment or the ball attachment.
Interesting.
You could get a pack with all of them, I think, which was up to 240. Yeah,
the header on this Ars story says, "Finally the gold after all the garbage."
Yeah. Well, but then also when you get down to where they're talking about playing it with actual games, Ars is said the first thing, the lead in the Half-Life 2 section is, it's harder to use this. I would never actually use it in multiplayer, but it gives the game new life.
Sure.
Which for a game that it was in, let's see, 2007. I guess Half-Life 2 was new in 2007. So that's probably
2004 it came out, so it was still pretty dominant.
That's an old game then.
Yeah.
You're playing that in multiplayer probably at that point.
Yeah. When you fire the shotgun, the orb kicks in your hand. That's kind of cool. I mean, that probably makes it, like he said, harder to play, but that's at least kind of neat.
Yeah, they released a mod. They released some other stuff for it. And they released drivers. They had multiple like tiers of support based on how the feedback worked. They released a driver that let you use it with everything, and it became very popular in the community of people who wanted to have intimate relations with their computer. Let's say.
Sure.
I had one of these and gave it away at some point because I was like, I don't think I want to have one of these around my house. People think things.
I think there was one around GameSpot as well. I seem to remember it being fairly bulky.
It was really big and really heavy, and the box for it, you had to put it in the box right, or else you'd jack up the arms, or you had to leave it out, and it was hard to dust. And also, like I said, there were some intimations if you had one sitting on your desktop. It was sold for a really long time. People were making these. They were made these until like 2012 or 2013 or something.
Okay. Seems like you can get them on eBay if you really need one.
They are available. The last thing on our list, unless we're going to talk about the dual N64 controller config for GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, which is still...
I left it alone earlier when you implied that the N64 controller was among the worst of all time. Like, I'm not rendering an opinion here, but some people are going to take notice of that comment.
I played a lot of GoldenEye with 4 controllers and 2 people playing the game. It was the best way to play a first-person shooter on a console prior to 2-stick shooter.
Wait, you were dual handing?
Huh?
You were dual handing?
Yeah, it was a supported configuration for the rare shooters.
Wow.
You held the middle prongs of 2 controllers, and you had basically you were giving up everything for the ability to turn and shoot at the same time, because you couldn't change. It was hard to change guns. It was hard to jump. It was hard to do everything else, but you could turn and shoot at the same and move at the same time. The last thing on the list is the Steam controller, which came out in 2015.
Yeah.
And it's on the list because it's the inverse of these other ones, where the other ones were trying to get ways to play first-person shooters on the PC without using a mouse and keyboard. This is a way to let people play mouse and keyboard games on the PC without using a mouse and keyboard. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I'm prepared to render judgment on the Steam controller. I was not a huge fan of it at the time. Over time, the software has gotten a lot better, and the implementation of it that's on, say, a modern Steam Deck, I'm going to say pretty good. I play mouse and keyboard games with the touchpads on the Steam Deck more often than I would expect.
That's fair. Yeah. I have bought a Steam controller, have never used it, other than to just like hold it in my hands and click those touchpads and be like, this feels weird.
If you play in a living room, a lot of people, a lot like... I've worked with people who use them regularly to stream games to the living room with a Steam Link or something like that.
Some people swear by it.
So that's it. My favorite thing in this whole in this whole thing was when I was going through and I found the note about the SpaceOrb and boot, that they have a picture of it and they have like 3 things highlighted. And one of them is DOS and Win95 programming interfaces. 6 buttons can be programmed. And the third note, extremely comfortable rubber ball. I'm going to go and tell you 25 years in. This came out in 96, 27 years in, 28 years in now. Ball's still comfortable.
That's, there's something to be said. I've got late model DualShock 4s, the PlayStation 4 controller, where the analog sticks have gone tacky, sticky, nasty rubber.
Yeah. I don't know what changed, man, but everybody should make their stuff out of the SpaceOrb ball rubber. This stuff, it feels great.
We've lost so much. They've taken so much from us.
Yeah. Thanks, environment.
Man, I was pretty happy with products people love as an episode title, but extremely comfortable rubber ball.
Look, if you don't have an extremely comfortable rubber ball in your life, what are you even doing?
You were missing out.
Yeah, I want to find somebody who can make the. I got to figure out how to make one of those shields for the Arduino to get this thing going again. Yeah, I want to play some Fortnite with this bad boy.
That would be kind of cool. You know what? I bet you would be the only person on all of Twitch.tv
playing Fortnite with a SpaceOrb.
Playing Fortnite with a SpaceOrb 360.
Are there enough buttons? I could change guns probably. I think I could probably make that work. I wouldn't be able to build, but that's fine because I'm old and I don't build. I think that'll do it for us this week, Brad.
Yeah, that was a fun little retrospective.
Yeah, I this was one of my favorite times in games. And just to be clear, there's a bunch of weird stuff that people did that wasn't a specific product. Like people were playing first-person shooters with fight sticks and like throttles and rudders and all that stuff. People did some buck wild stuff in the early first-person shooter days, like play Quake with just a trackball.
Yes.
I knew a guy who worked in the Linux lab at the university, and he would play with the nub. Like he had a standalone ThinkPad nub that he just bought and was on his desk, and he would use that to aim. And like people were all over the place.
Whatever floated your boat back then.
But you know who's not all over the place?
Who's that?
Our patrons.
Yeah, that's right. They've got it together.
I mean, I guess they are technically all over the place.
Geographically all over the place,
yes.
But united in their love of extremely nerdy stuff.
Yeah. And as always, we say this every week, but the Tech Pod is a listener supported show. We don't take ads. We don't take sponsorships, really. We just read the people who like to support us on Patreon every week, and we thank them all. If you want to find out how to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/techpod. Again, it's patreon.com/techpod. And for $5 a month, you get access to the Discord, which is full of people who like nerdy stuff, like old first-person shooter controllers from the 90s and building Arduino shields to bring them back to life and all sorts of other stuff like that. But a very special thank you goes out to our executive producer tier patrons, including Paddle Creek Games makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, Jordan Lippett, Bunny Fiend, the Just Wedge, Joel Krauska, Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, James Kamek, and Pantheon, makers of the HS3 high-speed 3D printer. Thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you. And I'll remind people again, if you want to see pictures of all the stuff we've been talking about, the Google Doc link will be in the show notes.
Yeah, and I'll go through and put pictures of everything in here so that they don't have to go to the links if they don't want to. But the links are interesting. Like some of these reviews, finding a review from a site that existed before Google on Google was really lovely because you get a glimpse back into the 1997 internet, 1998 internet.
I was pretty delighted to see some of these original page designs are still up for these reviews from like 2001.
Yeah, I can't remember. Maybe it might be the Neowen. No, I can't remember which one it was. One of them had one of the old Amazon badges. The Eden Waith, I think, page has one of the old Amazon badges on. No, that's not it. Yeah, it has one of the old Amazon badges on the side that's like, Amazon, we sell everything. And they're just talking about books at the time because it's, 100 years ago. But that'll do it for us this week. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a lovely, lovely week, and we will see you next time. Bye.